I want to spend the next 55 minutes or so in conversation with these personalities who I will introduce as I get to them in the conversation. And I think I want to start with Dr. Julianne Malveaux, who's in the center in the red suit. Dr. Malveaux is the president emerita of Bennett College for Women. So, having been the president of a women's college, she understands these issues, I suspect, acutely in her own right. She is also a renowned economist and lecturer and writer, and I've known her for a number of years, and I'm honored that she took the time tonight to join us in this conversation. Dr. Malveaux, let me start, if I can, at an unorthodox place, perhaps, counterintuitive, perhaps. But as this conversation has unfolded over the last couple of months, is there something that you've not been hearing in this conversation? Is there an issue that you've not seen raised to the fore, an issue not given the kind of import that you'd like to see it given in this conversation? What's been missing for you in this conversation?
Well, Tavis, I think I mentioned to you that I'm working on an essay called Race, Gender, and Me Too. Mm-hmm. I don't think that race has been talked about very much, and I don't think that the differential amount of power that different women have has been talked about very much. Sexual harassment, there was a case, now I'm not going to remember the name of it, in 1986, when actual sexual Meritor versus a bank. And the sister is an African-American woman named Meritor who, her boss, who also unfortunately happened to be African-American, harassed her for a period of years and basically extracted sex from her and told her, if you don't sleep with me, you're going to lose your job. And then she lost it anyway. And she sued, and the Supreme Court did rule that that kind of behavior in the workplace fell under Title VII. They had not ruled on, which is discrimination, of course. They had not ruled on that before. So it's an African-American woman who brought this forward, just like the sister who did the hashtag #MeToo brought this forward. But we have not talked about, until Oprah Winfrey raised the name of Recy Taylor, we had not talked about what happened to African-American women. And Recy Taylor, if you don't know, was an African-American woman who was raped by 6 white men in 1944 in Anniston, Alabama. She was walking home with an older black woman, and these guys saw her. She was 23 years old. She had a 3-year-old child, and they just took her. They just abducted her and raped her and violated her so badly she could not have any more children. There's a book called At the Dark End of the Street that talks about this case in some detail. I mean, the devil was so busy that they offered her husband money to say it was okay that they raped his wife. And it made the New York Times in 1944 when you didn't talk about black women and rape. We had no virtue as black women that could be violated. So when I think about Recy Taylor, I also think about my mom, who when she was in college at Xavier, went to, worked as basically as a maid, which in 1940, 70% of all black women did, worked as a maid and talked about how certain bosses she had to just duck and dodge. She would say, well, this guy comes home, I go clean the bathroom. Because, you know, he was always the pat on the butt, the whatever. But black women have had to put up with that always. And white women have been co-conspirators with white men. The lying white woman who said that Emmett Till whistled at her, she lied. He was killed. 15-year-old boy killed. So, you know, although I don't want anybody sexually harassed, I don't want anybody raped, I don't want anybody having to deal with comments that they don't want to deal with. At the same time, there is a racial dimension. And the other piece of the racial dimension is how easy it is to attack black men. So one of the other words I haven't heard a lot, Tavis, is due process. So if somebody says it, then it's true. Now, most women, actually, what really happens is that most women do not report their rapes or their harassment. Most don't. And very few lie. But if it's 1% who lied and it's 100,000 people, that's 1,000 liars. And there are 1,000 men who are the other end of that. So I'm concerned about the racial dimensions of this. I wonder, even in your case, whether people are more quick to believe something about a black man than about another man. And I really feel that, with all due respect to my white sisters in the audience, that white women don't get it. And here's what I knew they didn't get it. When some fool put a pink pussy hat on Harriet Tubman's head in Harlem. Excuse me? When some fool, and I repeat that, fool, I wish I could meet her. No, actually I don't. And she wouldn't want to meet me either. Because, you know, I try to behave like a former college president, but occasionally I revert and I become Dr. Hoodrat. And that would have been a Dr. Hoodrat moment when I saw somebody put a pig pussy hat on Harriet Tubman's head. I mean, to me, it's just, it's like not getting history. So I think a lot of this is just ahistorical. I don't want anybody to be harassed. I want people to feel comfortable in the workplace, but I also want people to have due process. And I also don't think that everybody deserves a death penalty. And nobody's talking about any gradation. Now, like when you steal something, if you stole some candy bars at the store, that's a misdemeanor. You steal a car, that's a felony, okay? And there are very different punishments for candy bars at the store, unless in California you did it 3 times, in which case you're out. But then the felony of the car. So, you know, if someone, I mean, most people, many people, not most people, many people are awkward. They don't know what to say to people. So when some fool says something foolish, you tell them to stop. You know, and I don't know whether people have, and sometimes women are afraid, don't want to speak up. But I remember I had an old boss in radio. And one day the man put his hand on my breast. I think he had been drinking. And I just slapped him. Now, I mean, I didn't do it on purpose. You see, what had happened was my hand kind of came out of my arm socket and just went, shh. But I'm not accustomed to people putting their hands on my breast. And he said, did you just slap me? I said, did you just put your hand on my breast? I mean, A-B. Well, my friend said, you should get a T-shirt that says, did you just slap me? Did you just put your hand on my breast? I mean, sort of, they go together. But I'd like to see more women smack the mess out of somebody and keep on walking. Tell them it's not okay and keep on walking. I mean, sometimes we have to assert ourselves. And some fools, again, and there are fools in this world, don't know that they're wrong. Now, some fools do know that they're wrong, and they're extractive, and they're this, and they're repeat offenders. But again, I want race and gender to be talked about this a bit more. I want due process to be talked about a bit more, and I want some gradation to be talked about. If you do something that's out of order, you get demoted, or the New York Times took the guy off the White House beat, and he was suspended without pay for 2 months.
Glenn Rush.
That's right. He was suspended without pay for two months. I think that's fine. I think that's fair. Now, if he does it again, he's gone. But he got a warning. Yep. That's what I'm not hearing.
Since you went there, let me ask you, Dr. Malveaux, we've been discussing this in, again, Los Angeles on Monday night, last night in New Orleans at Dillard University. So we were on an HBCU campus. A lot of folk came out last night at Dillard for this conversation. And I was fascinated to hear the questions from the students last night, which I didn't get on Monday night with a different sort of crowd in L.A. But this issue of the hashtag #MeToo came up. There was a lot of conversation last night. I want to get your take on it since you referenced it. What do you make of the co-opting, if you will, of that hashtag #MeToo that a black woman started for a particularly different reason, but it's been co-opted by the community writ large, certainly co-opted by Hollywood. What do you make of the co-opting of that hashtag itself as the moniker for this movement?
Well, imitation is the best form of flattery. I think the sister has gotten some play. She was not on the cover of Time magazine, but she has been doing some interviews with one of those little actresses. I forget which one. Alyssa Milano. Thank you. But she's been doing some interviews. So she's gotten out there. She's talked to the Black Women's Roundtable. We had a telephone conversation, and she's talked to us about it. So I mean, I feel like imitation is the best form of flattery, as long as you don't just take it. You know, and I think that they've attempted, some of them, to give credit where credit is due. So I'm not really annoyed with them for that. I am annoyed with the, again, the whole notion that Me Too means pussy hat on Harriet Tubman's head. I'm annoyed with the fact that there seems to be something that's very classist about this Me Too as it's shown up in this current iteration. We talked about actresses, we talked about professional workers. Well, what about the clerical worker? What about the sister who cleans offices at night? Those are the people who are also experiencing abuse, and I'm not sure how quickly or meaningfully it trickles down from the actress or the lawyer to the, and I'm more interested in the sticky floor than the glass ceiling. I'm more interested in the women at the bottom than the women at the top. So I wonder how it changes the way that they live.
Let me ask you another question now, move on here. I've been reminded in reading and preparing for this tour that not unlike most other issues, this, pardon my English, ain't the first time we've been here. For those of us who remember Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas,
yes,
I went back to read about that, and all of these same kinds of issues were being discussed. Stephanie, who we'll talk to later, was the former chief counsel for Senator Edward M. Kennedy. I don't know if she was there then, but the point is that this issue was being discussed all around America at that point. Can you compare? Can you contrast then and now? Has much changed from then till now? Do you expect that anything will change from now until the next then? Just talk to me about that.
Well, you know, what's interesting about Anita Hill's case is that here was a very conservative, perfectly respectable looking black woman with no background of anything that was scandalous. And yet you had even Joe Biden, who lots of people call a feminist hero because of the Violence Against Women Act. She was unbelievable. I mean, she had erotomania. The things that they put on that woman was just ridiculous. And she stood it all. Of course, she had the best lawyers in the world in Charles Ogletree and, the folks from Howard University Law School. Mm-hmm. But she had to be cool under an enormous amount of pressure. Again, I am 1,000% certain that if Joe Biden had called me a lie and there was a bottle of water sitting at the table, he'd been wearing it. I'm 1,000% certain of that.
That's Dr. Hood coming back out, right?
He's what? Yeah, Dr. Hood that's back. But so I think there was a different kind of conversation because they were both African American. Mm-hmm. I don't think that, people talked about it, of course, it was on the air, I remember one day, Tavis, I was supposed to be in Sacramento for something. I'm from San Francisco. I lived in San Francisco until 1994. And I literally couldn't tear myself away from the television. I was supposed to be up at a BAPAC thing, Black American Political Action Committee. Mm-hmm. And I literally, I was dressed, I'm sitting there, and I just could not leave the television. And I finally called and said, guys, I'm not coming. They said, why not? I said, I'm watching the hearings. But I think that people looked at it differently because it was black folks. And I think that this began with white folks. So I think it's a double standard. Racism is alive and well. I don't care what anybody tells you. So they cared a little bit less about it. And Clarence Thomas, of course, was able to hide behind this notion of an electronic lynching using language that was inappropriate. He knows what he did. And that football-looking wife of his, she looked like she plays for the Green Bay Packers. Okay, that was ad hominem and it wasn't nice, but I said it anyway. But in any case, he knows what he did. He hid behind racially coded language, which made white folks more afraid of him than they were of Anita Hill. So that's, the way that patriarchy works. I don't know. I hope that this changes. I think the millennials have done an awful lot positive around the workplace. Mm-hmm. They demand workplace flexibility in ways that my generation, the baby boom, did not. They want, they'll tell you. My sister's out here somewhere. She hadn't worked a week before. She said, Doc, I don't like to come to work at 9 o'clock. Can I come at 9:30? And I said, Negro, please. And I said, well, if you're not going to come at 9, you might as well come at 9:30. But millennials they're more flexible. They make more demands. They ask for what they want. They're more likely to do that. And I think that if millennial women keep up the pressure, it's likely to signal a permanent change in the workplace. And I think that the fact that the conversation is happening means that people are going to continue to talk about it, and it may mean a permanent change. But again, men and women are going to be attracted to each other, whether they're in the workplace or not. People are going to go out to have a beer or a glass of wine after work, and some people should not drink because their behavior cannot be modified after they have had foreign substances. And so people are going to be thrown into situations where it's easy to be inappropriate. So we all need to have some things in our toolkit to say what we do about that which is inappropriate.
Okay. Let me introduce Stephanie Robinson, who is a lawyer, a lecturer on law, in fact, at the Harvard Law School, national media figure, author, former chief counsel, as I said, the late, great Senator Edward M. Kennedy, a faculty dean at Harvard College, and the former president and CEO of the Jamestown Project, a national think tank focusing on democracy. I think I want to pick up right where Dr. Malveaux left us, Stephanie, and ask, since you are lecturing these millennials at the Harvard Law School, and beyond this question, you can go wherever you want to go, but I think I want to start here, which is that it's clear to me, again, on the research that I've been reading, the conversations I've been having, again, at Dillard last night, on another college campus here at George Washington tonight, it's clear to me, as Dr. Malveaux says, there are some generational divides on this issue. Talk to me.
Yeah, I think that there are some divides, but I think there are a lot of similarities as well. And And it's interesting because we always sort of come to the millennials, but the millennials find themselves in a context, right? So the traditions and the society and the sort of white, male-dominated, misogynistic society that we live in is where the millennials come into. So for us to understand the context that we're in, understand the culture that we're in, is also really important. I think that people want to make that move really quickly and say, oh, millennials do it differently, and millennials are not a monolith either, right? That being said, I do think that it is important for us to understand that Generation X, Y, and millennials are different than sort of generations before that. Mm-hmm. And they think about gender very fluidly. They think about hierarchy very levelly. They think about the world and how they impact and interact with the world very differently. So I think that understanding that as a context does speak to, of course, with this issue of how you bump up into intimate relationships and how those relationships manifest themselves in places like the workplace or places like the classroom or places like the college campus becomes a little bit different. That being said, being on a college campus, I teach both at the law school and then at the college, and so I have this interesting kind of continuum of what I'm able to see. But you guys know it too. I mean, particularly over the last 3 years, we've seen this huge uptick in sexual assault, sexual harassment, Title IX issues. And so it's not like millennials get it or any of us get it. And so I want to say that I think that when you were asking the question about what's being left out of the conversation, for example, I think that in addition, and I wholeheartedly highlight and lift up the race issue and the dynamic between white women and black women. So not even just talking about race generally, but we talk about power dynamics a lot of times. And I think that dynamics are important as we think about the backdrop that we're dealing with here. We talk about, I think, four dynamics are really important. Media dynamics, particularly in the mainstream media dynamics. Power dynamics. I talked a little bit about the misogynistic, white, male-dominated country that we live in. Three, I talk about human dynamics, and that means what we are as human beings, sort of as civilized human beings, where we are, how we operate, what we bring to the table, what impacts us, that we also live in a capitalistic society, and sort of what incentivizes us or causes us to have reactions and responses. I don't think that we should be blind, nor should we be ignorant to that. Fourth, I think personal dynamics, and I speak a lot about it from a personal perspective. I'm a black woman, unique in my space. I sit at the bottom of the totem pole in most places. And I bring that to this conversation, that lens. I look at this through that lens. I'm a black woman, mother of 2 children who are black men. I bring that into this conversation. I'm the only female in my household. I bring that to this conversation, as do other people. That's just my own personal unique experience. But I think that backdrop is important for us to remember as we think about culture. And that's one of the things that I think is really missing from the conversation. I think that the fact that we are talking even about workplace, and Tavis is so great at doing this, while he says we're having a conversation about workplace, he gets it. We're not just talking about workplace. But I don't think other people actually want to talk about that. We've been talking about Hollywood, or we have sort of moved over and want to talk about media writ large, and then some people could try to sort of have scooted over to the academy. I'm sure they'll be moving over to the churches pretty soon. But all of these places are areas in where our culture is. And I don't step up to 1500 Mass Ave at Harvard and walk in that door and all of a sudden I'm a different person. The relationships I have with men and the relationships females have are really a large part of who we are and how we've been socialized. And to forget that, I think, is problematic, to forget the way in which females are socialized differently than men. Men and women are different. We have relationships. There's problems with how we look at how we socialize our children. And so these conversations, and not talking about how you arrive to where you are. That's why I say context is important. Whether you're a millennial or a Generation X, context is important. And the context that we all have been brought up in and the oxygen that we all breathe speaks a lot to how we act, interact, and respond to each other. So I would say that, and I say that because I actually had this conversation. I teach both Monday and Tuesday, and I had this conversation with my students, and they said, you're absolutely right. I mean, we get that, and people aren't talking about kind of how we interact outside of the workplace. The other thing we're not talking about is what the millennials also get and what young people get and older folks want to say they get. Everybody want to talk about work-family balance. How do you do work-family balance or work-life balance? Well, it's really, really hard to talk about work-life balance and what you're doing in the workplace when the workplace is all you're doing. When we are a country and a culture that lives probably 10 to 12 to 15 to 16 hours in many instances inside of a place that we call work, I don't know where the balance is, and I don't know how you're supposed to say that people aren't going to act and interact in ways and how you're able to actually form those lines of demarcation and boundaries that we so desperately seem to want to try to do right now. But if you're living at work, I mean, where are your opportunities to meet and interact with people? At work. So I think that there are a lot of these pieces that the moment is ripe, and I think that the opportunity is ripe for us to have some of these conversations and switch narratives, because narratives are really important. I started with the media. The media is really important here. I mean, I teach on media imaging, and I talk about the media is not merely what we watch on television. It's not what we read in the newspaper. It's not what we hear on the radio. It's really a communication that we do with each other. It's the story or the narrative that we tell ourselves. It's what society thinks of themselves. It's what we hear about ourselves, and it's what we put out to others. And so the way in how the media talks about this is as important as what they're saying about this. And I think that the media, quite frankly, the mainstream media, is just not the place to have nuanced conversations. So they want to bucket everybody. You got men here, you got women here, put them in these buckets, and you pick. And Lord forbid if you pick wrong, or even worse, you pick nuance. You say, I'm nuanced here. He was wrong here. She was right here. It's not. It's more complicated than that. You're going to be ostracized. You may be digitally tarred and feathered. You may be fired. And so the conversation that we're trying to have is a conversation about intimate relationships and how we have screwed those up from the inception of them, quite frankly. I mean, we talk about history and talk about sort of the pathology within the Black community and the white community and how we don't understand how to have relationships. So we have a lot that we're trying to deal with, but we just want to talk about Me Too. Me Too. Me Too. Me Too what, really?
And Stephanie, you said something about capitalism, and I think it's important for us to think about the extent to which what I call predatory patriarchal capitalism affects almost everything we do. Dr. King had a passage where he talks about how you can thingify. And the word he used was thingify. And when you look at exploitation from a capitalist perspective, first you have to look at enslavement.
Absolutely.
But then you have to look at the extent to it. So we're looking at enslavement, we're looking at Black men and Black women whose basic reproductive function became a profit-making
Absolutely. It's commodification of it.
And then you look at white women who were also thingified in a patriarchy. They couldn't own anything. I mean, white women, when they married, their property went to their husbands. You had to, when I bought my house, it said Julianne Malvo, an unmarried woman. I said, what that got to do with anything? Y'all took my money. You asked me when I was married, and after you took my money. Yeah. So it's irrelevant. But, the thingification of women is what makes it possible for men to believe that people want them. Like Harvey Weinstein.
Exactly.
I don't want to, let me tell you real quick, I don't want to leave the white woman out of this conversation. And I'm going to get to her in just a second. Julia, hold tight 1 second. I'm coming. As they say, Sam and Dave said, hold on, I'm coming. But Stephanie, let me follow up right quick. And I hope I can ask this question without having Dr. Malvo go apoplectic at the very question. But I think you'll take my point here. You talked about your experience, as did Dr. Malvo, of being a Black woman in America. in this conversation, because again, reading a lot about this, a lot of conversation about this the last couple of nights, let me ask the question this way. Have black women in this current moment, in this current iteration of this conversation about men and women in the workplace and beyond, have black women surrendered their agency to be heard in this conversation? Number one, are they talking and we just not hearing them? Are they being ignored? Are they being co-opted? I'm trying to understand where the role of black women is, where the voice, rather, of black women is in this conversation, because if it's there, it ain't been pronounced.
Well, I would say I can't speak for all black women. Let me start by saying that, and I don't try.
I thought you did.
I don't.
Okay.
I don't. And I would say that black women's voices are where they often are in all conversations that happen in this great United States of America.
Marginalized?
They're marginalized. Yeah. They're sidelined. They are in a place where you get a little bit of a talk. Somebody may nod at you. I love Anita Hill. I respect her. They put Anita Hill out there on the commission that they're working on with Hollywood. They did come back after they realized that, somebody found out that Tarana Burke had actually done the Me Too. And so somebody gave a nod because it was the right thing to do, or would have been the wrong thing not to do. But I think that whenever we're having real conversations at the inception of these movements, or the inception of these projects, or the continuation of them, black women aren't at the table. They aren't at the table at most places, to be quite honest. You come to some of the places like Harvard, or you go to NYU, and you go to some places, you see Dr. Melville, you see Kimberly Crenshaw, you see some brilliant black women who understand the dichotomy, they understand the intersectionality. They're not going to be racist about it, but people don't want to have those conversations. And the truth of the matter is, I think that in this moment, black women, and I'll speak for myself at this moment, but I think the others would agree, not all. I think that I had to take a deep breath. I had to make a decision as to whether or not I wanted to exert my time and energy into this space, understanding what it looked like to me. And it looked like a conversation about victimization. It looked like a conversation that was being led once again by white women, and I applaud them for doing it, but it didn't feel like a place where there was an invitation, but not even a room or an interest in having black women who were at equals with the white women who were trying to do this, and who might have a different way about setting the table. And so the important thing that I learned in working for Ted Kennedy, who I adored, is that it's always about how you set that table, how you put that agenda together, that you are there at the table setting it, as opposed to coming after they put everything there and are telling you what your role is to play now. So I think that that's part of what is happening here. And, and the truth be told about it, I've talked to my sons about it, I've talked to my students about it, and I really have, because of people like Tavis saying, right or wrong about what happened. We won't speak to the specifics of the allegations, again, the allegations that were made, but that someone was willing to say, and that a black man was willing to say, I'm not going to run away from this with my tail between my legs. That I have decided that I have built my brand, that I have spent the greater part of 30-something plus years doing the right thing, and that I'm not going to be pushed out. It spoke to me. Now, whether it's right or wrong, it spoke to me and said, well, maybe we can now have a conversation. Because even if I can disagree with you, and I will disagree with Tavis on a whole lot of things.
Amen. Yeah.
But if we can have that type of conversation, as opposed to everybody's on this side, and if you're on that side, you're wrong and you're ostracized. So I'm interested in having a conversation, and a nuanced conversation, and a dialogue, an honest dialogue about it. I'm not interested in having a fictitious movement, however.
Or a rally.
Or a rally. Or a rally.
That's because that's.
Or even a march.
This pink hat thing,
Back to the pink hat.
Yeah.
I find that, first of all, I would not put one of those pink hats on my head because I do not want to be known as a punani head. Just it's problematic. But, these white women are having these rallies. I would be more respectful, and I know I have many white women friends, and what I said to one who was a pundit, I said, did it ever occur to you to lift up that this might be different for women of color than it is for you?
Did Jamila Hill come up? Did you think about that? Did you think about how we oftentimes, in many different ways, are ostracized or oppressed by these same white men in ways that we are silenced? And did any of you come to her defense and say anything about that?
Let me jump in. I'm fascinated by this because this is the smallest crowd of the 3 nights so far, but the most fiery and enriching conversation. So you never know what you're going to get when you get 3 brilliant women together on a stage. And so I'm excited to continue this. Let me, though, bring in right quick Julie Cantor. She's a communications and behavior specialist. She's an all-in, roll-up-your-sleeves leader, author, blogger, speaker, serial entrepreneur, and I'm happy to have her here. I've insisted in every city, Julia, that we have a behavior specialist, a psychologist or a psychiatrist. We've had one in every city and will for the rest of the tour. Because if that Mars-Venus thing is real, then we have a problem communicating anyway. And in this particular moment, I don't know how we navigate our way through that. Many of you, good Washingtonians, I'm sure saw the front page story in your local paper, the Washington Post, on Monday that talked about where this conversation is headed and how these lines are going to be redrawn. I was fascinated by that story, front page on the Post this week. And so corporations now, Julia, as you know from probably reading that story, are trying to figure out what the new rules are. And there are some companies now that are saying to their employees that if you are a man and a woman who work for this company and you travel together on a business trip, you cannot ride in the same rental car. We know you shouldn't stay in the same hotel room, but according to this story on the front page of the Post, you can't even stay in the same hotel if you're traveling for business. We know Mike Pence, the vice president, said this some months ago, and I was surprised that it didn't get more fallout, that there wasn't more reaction to it then. But now you have companies saying that if you're a male employee, you can't go to lunch alone with a female employee. Well, in California, where I live, that also means, based upon the way we run our state, that you can't go to lunch with a male employee either by yourself, or the 2 women can't go to lunch together alone. I mean, that's where this thing is headed, but it's a conversation about where and how we sort of redraw these lines. That's a long way of asking where, with regard to our interaction, our behavior, our communication with each other, what do you see this moment taking us, or not?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I want to first thank you for having me and for this great dialogue on men and women in the workplace and this very invigorating conversation. And Julianne, thank you for bringing me to the table here. My focus over the last 5 years, I've gone into corporate America and I've worked with some of the top companies as we look at this increasingly alienated workforce where people are behind their computers 24/7. We're not shutting our computer screens. We're not making eye contact. And people are very isolated now in the workforce. Actually, Gallup did an engagement survey which showed that 32% of Americans feel engaged right now with their jobs. For millennials, it was 28%. Actually, for women managers, 40%. And just a little piece of good news, women working for women actually had the highest level of engagement from a management structure, whereas many women, it's been perceived that they don't like working with other women in corporate America. This findings actually showed it wasn't true. So the lens I've looked at all of this has been a lens of mentoring. Like the movie Avatar, the Na'vi phrase is, "I see you." And my question is, do we really see each other at work as human beings, as a mother, as a sister, as a woman who's, father's in hospice care, or someone who just got a big promotion, or someone else who lost a baby? Do we actually see each other in the office place? And how can we have more mentoring conversations to advance more diversity in corporate America and better retain our millennials who are voting with their feet? 21% of millennials left their jobs last year, 60% plan to leave. And then as you look at where the highest paying jobs are, which are in the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, math, over 50% of women drop out of these fields. These jobs pay 30, 40% more than other fields. And when women are asked why are they dropping out of these fields, especially tech in Silicon Valley, hostile working environments, alienation, loneliness. So what I really want to say here is I had the opportunity personally, as I built my own company, to mentor. I took the word mentor, decided it needed to be more inclusive. So by putting TWO, like Rob Bay says, it takes two to make things go right, it also gets the word women and men into mentoring. And I think we need to have more of these mentoring conversations. And a mentoring conversation are, what are appropriate boundaries for a man to ask some female coworkers? But one thing I noticed is in talking to 1,500 high-level leaders, women of all ethnicities, but pretty much at the top of their game in all industries, when I asked women, what is the difference, do you know the difference between a mentor and a sponsor? Most women and men don't know the answer to that unless you're like in HR or diversity. But a mentor is someone who speaks with you and advises you, shares from his or her own experience. A sponsor is someone who speaks about you behind closed doors and champions you to other people. Now, what I want to say here might be a little controversial, but out of 1,500 women I spoke to, the vast majority, over 90%, if they had that champion at work who helped them get opportunities, jobs, promotions, stretch assignments, over 90%, if they had a sponsor, it was a male sponsor.
Can I ask
Men have been,
Go and finish, Julia. Go finish. Junior, please finish.
yeah,
I got you, Stephanie.
men
I got
have
you.
been historically very strong sponsors, more so to other men, because people tend to sponsor in their own likeness. And I think there's a big opportunity right now for us to look and have the conversation. We don't want men to feel, and I've heard this from dozens of men. I wrote an article called Men Mentoring Women, 8 Healthy Boundaries in the Age of Me Too. And a man said to me, we had coffee, I showed him the article, I was like, how offensive is this gonna be? And he said, you know what? He goes, I just tell men, don't do it. Do not mentor women. It's too toxic out there. You have to be so uber conscientious. And he goes, you know what, Julie? I wouldn't hire a hot woman. I would not hire an attractive woman. I'm going to be hiring. I would not hire an attractive woman because they're afraid. Yeah. So what we don't want to happen in the mix of the Me Too movement is that we move away from health, and we need to be focusing on healthy boundaries. When anyone holds a position of power, male or female, there needs to be boundaries of what's healthy. So yeah, ever since starting my company, I was getting mic'd to be a keynote speaker at a women's conference. And the guy comes up to me and he goes, okay, I'm ready to do ya. And he's coming, he's putting the mic on, he goes, look, we got to second base already. And 5 more of those comments. So I thought about it. After I spoke, I walked over to him and I said to him, Barry, I think Barry's from Long Island. I said, you know, I think and I suspect you're a nice guy. And I think and I suspect that you've been using this shtick to mic women's for the last 30 years. But I got to tell you, for some women, it's going to make women feel uncomfortable. I don't think, and I really didn't, that he was like really nervous and apologetic. I don't think you meant harm, but I'm just going to encourage you to change your shtick. Part of this is we do need to speak up. And if something is wrong, and I think everyone on this stage and probably in this audience, we've all had instances and issues where it's uncomfortable. But the question is, you know, how do we create these healthy boundaries for ourselves, for our daughters, for our nieces, for our sons? How do we create these healthy boundaries between men and women, women and women, men and men, where people are safer and more productive and more mentoring in the workforce? I
want to come back in a minute. I promise we will, Julie. I want to come back to this notion that everybody's talking about, which is whether or not this moment is, as you started to suggest, whether or not this moment is going to boomerang on women, whether or not there's going to be a price to
And I
pay
would
down
call
the
it
road.
a movement. I'm not sure I'd call it a moment.
Yeah, I got it. We'll come back to that. We'll come back to that.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about whether or not it's going to boomerang. But
Right.
but I want to go back to this stat you raised a moment ago about these women who 90% of them said they've been mentored by men.
Champion. No.
Champion.
Sponsored by men.
Exactly. Sponsored by men. Okay, got it. So there are two ways to read that stat. At least in my mind, at least there are two ways. At least two ways. One is that men aren't as bad as I think we are. That we're doing a good job trying to mentor women. Sponsor women, champion women.
You are.
Or the other way to read it is that patriarchy is real. And the reason why they're being sponsored or mentored or championed by men is that the only men are at the top of the ladder in the first place. Yeah. How do I read that stat?
You know, so I think you're bringing up an excellent point, and I've actually have talked to many chief diversity officers of corporations and talked to many women about, Harvard Business Review did a piece, are we mentoring women but sponsoring men in corporate America? And all the data shows that men are like double, triple after college more likely to get a job as a manager. So men have historically been in higher positions of power. And so to find a sponsor, you need someone who has power, who can champion you for opportunity. I would argue there's huge opportunities for women, for Blacks and Hispanics, for us to co-sponsor each other, to champion each other, and to start claiming our own power. We have so much more power to make connections, to champion. With the media today, we can all be our own media outlets. We have so much more power than we realize. And for women, I want them to know we can flex this muscle to sponsor other women, to sponsor other men. And but also, the data does show, and I just want to just throw it out here so it's here. The Washington Post stated that 33 million women have reported sexual harassment in the workplace, and 14 million women have reported being sexually assaulted in the workplace. And Dr. Malveaux, the fact that whether it's the woman cleaning the hotel rooms, or whether it's the anchor on Fox, whoever, that we want a safer environment, and that still comes back to this notion of what are healthy boundaries in the workplace.
Dr. Condoleezza Rice, Stephanie, I saw you want to get in, but this thought came to me as Julie was talking. Dr. Rice, Secretary Rice, said in an interview recently that she was afraid that this movement, she didn't want this movement, this moment, to turn women into snowflakes. I thought about that as Julia was talking. So I'm just putting that out there. Take it where you want to take it. But whatever you want to say, go ahead and run with it. And I wonder, I'm raising that because I'm asking whether or not you think that Secretary Rice has a point.
I guess is the snowflake this sort of precious? The preciousness that she's...
Or fragile.
When you say
fragile,
snowflake, that already brings up a whole lot of issues.
I saw the
for me.
interview. She meant fragile.
She meant fragility. Fragility. Yes.
So, I think it may turn them into that perceptionally by men yet again. And so I think that the question that you asked Julie was the question I was actually looking at is when you start talking about 90% of these positions of power, these positions of leadership, and I say positions of power because I'm not talking about mid-management. I'm talking about sort of the positions
CEO.
that actually make decisions. So in some places they're CEOs, they're COOs, they're the C-suite, sort of what we're talking about,
Director
right?
and up.
So up.
Director.
So you're saying, but these are, if you have the percentage of men who are in these positions, and we know that men oftentimes, even without why they choose a woman to do it, but they're dealing with more men that they're bringing into these positions. And most of the studies that I've read and seen seem to suggest that most women who actually are mentoring and sort of continue to do so and get pushed up are being done by women. That women are taking on other women and sort of doing more of that work. And particularly with Black women. I wasn't talking about women. Black women have nobody to mentor them. So, I mean, the reason you don't see any sort of high-ups happening and you don't see black women in these positions to sort of talk about what's the kumbaya moment for us to all get together and say we have power is because so many in these places, so many black women don't have any power and they don't have a network. Because, I mean, this is how all the business works. I mean, it's what we teach them at HBS, right? We teach, you network. I mean, a large part of this is who you're networking with, who you know, who's connecting, who's going to speak on your behalf, and who's going to mentor you. And I'm telling you, almost everybody I've talked to anecdotally right now, and they've told me we did not hire this.
Let me.
We did not hire that person. So I am curious to see whether or not we're going to see the blowback. But that is to Condoleezza Rice's point, right, Tavis, is that the perception, and it's starting to, it's starting to pull itself out. Is the perception is that women are too fragile right now. They complain about too much. I'm concerned.
What she talked about, which was interesting, is the interview was with David Axelrod.
Sure.
On CNN.
The Axe Files, yeah.
And she talked about how she's had comments over the course of her career, never been assaulted, but certainly had these inappropriate comments, and that she knew how to shut them down. And then, so basically, she was saying, I guess the same point that I made earlier, women need to toughen up a bit. In other words, just tell somebody, get your hands off me. Just say, I don't really talk like that. I prefer not to have that kind of conversation in the workplace. I mean, I think that unless somebody flashes you, most women, and if somebody flashes you, they should be short and appendage when they finish. But unless somebody I think that most women,
but most women aren't going to do that.
But they should. But I know that
they're not going to.
I get your point about culture and about how women have been acculturated and how women are. But what I'm saying to younger women, and what I said,
those are precisely the women who aren't going to do it.
What I said to my students always is, if it's wrong, say something. Don't be afraid to get up out of the room. I had a case on campus that really broke my heart because one of my drivers was just a lot of fun, and it turns out he was actually messing with one of my students. And I said to the girl, he was basically harassing her. And I said to the girl, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you tell somebody, RA, somebody? She said, I don't want him to lose his job. I'm like, hell. His job is the last thing you need to worry about. You need to worry about yourself.
But you're onto something now, Dr. Malvo. Let me follow up real quick, though. We all saw this horrific story about Dr. Nasser at Michigan State.
Exactly.
And just to get right to the point, one of the reasons that a lot of women, we are told, don't say anything is they're afraid that they're not going to be believed. When you see that case of Dr. Nasser, there were young girls and their mothers who were trying to be heard, trying to get their truth to be respected for years. And when that doesn't happen, you look up years later and you got 150, 160 witnesses coming out because nobody would believe them back in the day. The question is, what is to be done in this moment? Is there something that can be done? How do we shift this conversation for women to be believed, Dr. Malvo, when they do speak up?
I think that's what's so fascinating about the Me Too movement. Right. Because I think that women were afraid. I think that, I worked at the DC Rape Crisis Center way back when, and, it was like 6% of rapists get convicted. So it was often blaming of the victim. You shouldn't have worn that short skirt. You shouldn't have been out by yourself at 11 p.m. You shouldn't have worn that glossy lipstick, et cetera. It was often a blaming of the victim. And I think, this is my opinion, I think when our president said, you can grab them by I think that, I believe that was the moment where people said, you know what, that's not okay. And then women came out, we had the Million Women marches, all right? And women came out and they said, this is bullshit. And women started speaking out and, and then we had a lot of, so I think that it actually, women started getting a little bit more confident, because when I talk to a lot of women and they've had a sexual harassment issue, they often feel, and they describe to me that I feel like I'm a deer in the headlights. He did not just say, or she did not, what? It's almost, it's a shock. And then people don't know how to articulate something back, or as Dr. Malvo would say, slap the face. But they feel like a deer in headlights.
Yeah.
And part of this is, how do we start coming up with, I don't know, call it a toolkit, of responses. Look, back off, I'm a married woman.
But
Look, back off, I don't mix business with
let me.
pleasure.
Please don't call the marches Million Women's Marches. The women of the nation had a Million Women's March right after the Million Man March. And the women who had the Women's March were appropriately chastised by African American women, again, for appropriation. So please don't call them women.
The Women's March, fair
you.
enough, fair enough.
But let me jump in right quick, though. Let me jump right quick. Julia raises the issue of President Trump and what he said. Let's just follow that in. One of the things that I'm trying to understand myself in this moment is how it is that we are in a society now that has been for some months now, almost celebrating certain people being brought down, which is not to say that those persons should have been brought down if they are guilty of doing what they are alleged to have done. So it's clear. That said, though, we're celebrating certain people being brought down, but the behavior in the White House has been normalized. And I don't know what kind of message we're sending to society writ large if it's normalized in the highest office of the land. Normalized, protected, people continue to work with him to make excuses for him, et cetera, and yet we're celebrating others.
I disagree with that, Tavis.
Okay, tell me why.
Yeah, because I don't think that it's normalized. I think that the same people that are going after Trump and Weinstein and Wynn and others are the same people who are saying.
You don't think it's normalized by senators and congressmen and leaders and others who defend that?
I think that when you deal with exactly, I think that when you deal with the
deal
political
that they
side of it,
yeah.
and you're talking about that when you have Republicans who are dealing because it is a political decision that they are making, is very different than saying that this country. And most people have said that behavior is normal.
But it's normalized by them. That's my point.
Well,
it is normalized by them.
It's not even
It's not
normalized by
what
them.
it is. I mean, one of them said something about he got a mulligan.
Yeah, he got a mulligan, he got a do-over.
After the prostitute thing, the $130,000 to Stormy Weather or whatever.
Daniel.
that was a great song. That was a great song. Yeah, okay.
Stormy weather for him, stormy.
Yeah.
But in any case, they are basically cynically deciding that because he's got this core of 37% of the population that will support him, as he said, if he shot somebody on Fifth Avenue, that basically they're thinking we can get anything through here that we want to. Ryan and McConnell have both
Which is
slept
a
with
brilliant
the devil.
political calculation. I mean, it is a brilliant political calculation, but that's what I said. You got to talk about the context that you find yourself in. And so I don't think that you would have anybody who's on CNN or anybody who's, even some of the people, anybody in mainstream media or any of the advocates that are out here or any of the women who are tweeting, nobody is going to say that behavior is okay, but the other behavior is not. I think that everybody feels, and they say it, you hear it all the time, Trump is doing the same thing that Weinstein does. It's all wrong.
I think people are so upset about what Trump said.
I do.
I think they're so, I think.
Oh, I agree with that.
Upsetting that it led to a lot of, like Weinstein and others, heads rolling. And I do think we do have to, as Julianne said, there is a continuum here. There's a very big difference between raping many women and, there's a continuum here. And so the sexual harassment to sexual assault.
Exactly. And can we, because
there's a continuum there.
Talk about, because we talk about this rape culture. I mean, and Julie, you had brought up like rape and then sexual assault and then sexual harassment and all in one breath. And they're so very different.
Exactly.
They're so very different. I mean, if we don't have a conversation about rape and victimization, then that's a very different conversation. And then there's all different types of rape that we're talking about, whether it's, acquaintance rape or whether it's sort of violent rape and primary rape or there's common law rape. But then there's a conversation about sexual harassment. And I think that that's the conversation that people are having, though they talk about sexual assault in the same space with that. But I don't mean to cut this off because I do want to go back to something I was trying to say about the.
But before you jump though, you will admit though that in this moment those things are being conflated.
I do think that they're being conflated.
That's all
I
I'm
think
asking.
that's problematic.
Okay.
Well,
I don't think that we have to. I don't think that we have to add to that though. So I think that if we want to have a conversation about sexual assault and sexual harassment and rape, then let's have those different conversations. But I do think what has happened because the people who are setting the table for this conversation lump everything to get sex. They hear sex, men and women, and it all sits in one box. And then we're having conversations about, as both of my panelists have said, this continuum. You're talking about a 17-year-old statutory rape with a high, movie music producer. That's rape. I mean, that's very different than somebody saying something to you that you didn't find made you particularly comfortable or put you at
Totally
ease.
agree with
I got to go. I
agree with you.
got to go in 5 minutes. I'm going to go. We've been taking questions on blue cards all across the country. Since we're such an intimate gathering here, if you have a question or comment, I think you can just stand up and shout it out, and I can hear it, and they can hear it, and we'll
Can we
respond to
speak
it.
to the truth?
We will. 1 second. Yeah, I promise. What I wanted, I'll call it 5 minutes. I'll come to the audience. So get your thought together, and I promise I'll come to you. You can answer any way you want to answer, where you want to go in a second, Stephanie. But what I want to put on the table now for you to respond to is how we feel about this dichotomy between transparency and privacy. We're in a moment now where there's this effort, which I certainly support, to protect people who want to tell their truth and protect their privacy. But if you're on the other side and there's no transparency about what's being said, it's sort of hard to respond to that. And so there's a lot of conversation now about where that line is between transparency and privacy. It's out there. You can respond to it. Where do you want to go, Stephen?
So it speaks to my issue,
Right.
and it's one that Dr. Malveaux brought up at the beginning when you said what was left out of this conversation, and it's the one on due process. And so it's, yes, as a woman, do I think that because a woman is saying that I'm a victim that she is necessarily telling the truth? I think that to me is problematic. That everybody who comes out and says that something has happened, that they're being truthful, I just don't agree. I think that's wrong. On the same side, I think that every man that is being alleged of something is not a liar either. And so I think that you can't say that women are right and truthful, men are bad and liars, and therefore, because this woman has said something about this lying man, we believe her, and we're not going to get into her private life. We're not going to talk about anything else. We're just going to let her allegation ride. And I think that is what has been happening in the court of public opinion. This is not to say what is actually happening when legal proceedings are going on behind closed doors. And I think that the problem we have right now, particularly because we have these high-profile people, or at least these high-profile cases that have come up, is that we have no idea what is actually being disclosed behind closed doors. We have no idea of what people are interrogating. And I think that to me is problematic. It's problematic that we allow for people to come out and say whatever they want to say publicly about somebody, destroy somebody's life and their family, and they do not have to, at some level, put more out on the table to speak to the credibility and the veracity.
But why should they, if they've already been victimized in the first place, Stephanie, why do they have to then get re-victimized by putting their face or their name out publicly?
But if they, basically, I think that they should, at least, if they're, I'm looking at the case of Aziz.
I'm sorry. Yeah, sure.
This young lady said she had the worst date of her life. All I said about that was, girl, you need to live a little longer, because she was about 22. And if the worst date of her life was she went out, drank and ate, man gave her a little oral sex, he did it first to her, and if she didn't want to do it,
Leave.
That's not rape. Close your legs. Real simple. I don't want you to do that for me. So it got kind of funky when she had to reciprocate. But in any case, this man has had his name dug through the mud, and she's Grace with the quotation marks around it. I think that's just really blatantly unfair. And again, if you read the article in babe.org or whatever, she flirted with him initially. She came on to him. He's a famous guy, I guess. I don't watch Netflix yet. The millennial gave me the passcode, so then I'll watch it. But
in a minute, we'll all be watching Netflix. Yeah. That's all there'll be to watch is Netflix. But
anyway, I'm not blaming the victim at all. But what I'm saying is, you come out there, you got the man's name out there.
You got
what about you?
Yeah, you can't come out and attack someone. Because once you make that decision that you're going to come public, you've made a decision that it's going to have to be public. So it's not a victimization. It's not, I mean, it's how we deal with it. And of course, it's a case by case. Again,
Sure.
all has to be case by case. But I don't think that you can say, I'm going to step out this much and then I'm going to pull back. When you're stepping out, impacts somebody else's life in real ways.
And you know, stepping out is taking your power back. If you were actually raped, if you were actually, and I'm not, you know, fewer than 1%, I think it's 1 or 2%, but if you were actually raped, if something actually happened, you have been violated. You feel disempowered. The way to get your power back is to stand up and say, I was raped and he did it. Stand out, and a couple of things may happen. Somebody may find out. There was a rumor going around on the Hill very recently that a member of Congress had sexually harassed somebody. They'll be nameless. It turned out, I mean, there was speculation and posts for a minute, and then it dropped. Why? Because the young lady had pulled that stunt in 3 or 4 other places, and it was a stunt. Whenever her work was less than adequate, suddenly she had been sexually harassed, and she was let go of 2 places for that very reason, because her work was inadequate. So when she stepped out, folks said, she said that? Well, again, think about it. You know, again. So, I mean, but I think if you actually have been raped or harassed or anything and you step out, you're taking your power back.
But speaking of power, let me give something to the audience. Again, we got a small, intimate crowd, so if you got a question or comment, we'll start here on the front row. We got 30 minutes just so shout it out and make it brief, and we'll get an answer. All right, you're first, right here. I saw you first. There's a microphone there. Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate the microphone. All the other cities, by the way, are going to be jealous when they see this on Facebook tonight, that y'all got to talk and supposed to write down a blue card. But go ahead, make it brief for me.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here and having this panel. I myself am speaking as a sexologist. My master's is in human sexuality, and one of the key undertones I'm hearing constantly in this conversation is the language. And the language that people don't have, because we truly have not defined consent. Mm-hmm. We truly have not defined what rape is. We truly have not defined what harassment is. You know, there are these very vague, gray descriptions, and we've allowed, you know, patriarchy, hypermasculinity to lead this American culture since its existence. And now that we're asking to actually put the brakes on it, you're naturally going to get some resistance. Even with the label of feminism, when there are different types of feminisms, and there are feminists with an S, because there are different types of feminists. So, you know, when a woman speaks up, oh, you one of those feminists, and it's like, well, which one? Which one are you referring to?
So let me ask you right quick. As a sexologist, I'm just watching my time, trying to get more people involved. Sure. As a sexologist, what say you then about how we go about defining these terms? Because you're right. How do we do that?
The first thing is that, you know, we have to allow sex education to actually teach children what their body is, right? Like, we have children and young people who cannot even identify their body parts, which means they don't know good touch from bad touch, right? And so we silence our kids immediately. As soon as we start talking about their bodies, say, oh, look who got their boobs in. Oh, their body, in front of everybody, right? You take that power away immediately, and then you expect them to grow up and to be able to speak for themselves. Well, that's not going to occur. That's not going to occur for young boys. That's certainly not going to occur for young women. And then we're going to have this societal clash.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that. Let me move on very nicely down. Yes, sir. Question or comment?
Yes, so I'm part of 2 men's groups. One of them is pretty much all African-American men, and the other one is mostly white men. And it's interesting to me how these conversations are happening in 2 totally different ways. Basically, the black men are scared and the white men are angry. The black men are basically trying to figure out how we're going to mitigate these sort of scenarios.
Wow.
Affecting their own lives and affecting their jobs and things along those lines. They're trying to figure out if they have someone in their past that they need to talk to. Maybe they didn't handle this situation right, that situation right. And the white men, on the other hand, are saying, oh, this isn't fair. there's no due process. I'm not being taken care of. My rights aren't being respected.
And what do you make of that dichotomy between those two groups?
Exactly. Well,
Yeah.
no, I think that it says a lot about our larger society. I mean, black people have a relationship with criminology, or the assumption of criminology that white people don't, particularly, the difference between white and black men. So yes, it's a reaction. It's a hyper reaction to the fact that an accusation to me versus an accusation to Billy over there, are two totally different situations. But I was interested in the panel.
I'm curious, Dr. Malvo, what do you make of that? That black men, he's saying, are scared, and white men are angry.
Well, white men, it's a racist, capitalist, predatory patriarchy. So they see their rights being taken away. They see, I used to get to do this, and now I don't. What do you mean I can't ask my assistant out? What do you mean, look at Harvey Weinstein. He seemed to think nothing was wrong with all this stuff he did. And so this is a sense of entitlement of, I'm angry that you're taking away something that I used to have. Whereas with the black men, as you say, the relationship between law enforcement and African-American men is fraught with all kinds of challenges and misunderstandings. So yeah, brothers are afraid. You look at, I have a 21-year-old godson and grown nephews, and we have a conversation constantly about what to do, what not to do. I told one of them, I said, get caught with that white girl in the wrong neighborhood. Just do it, and you see what happens. Yeah. And because we know that even today, 2018, that there's some places where you see a black man and a white woman in a car, and it's going to cause a police to pull over what's going on here, even though they may be boyfriend and girlfriend, they may be husband and wife. Yeah. So I think that black men do tend to naturally look askance at anything that will put them in the path of the law. And too many black men have been wrongfully convicted, are sitting in jail for stuff they didn't do. I'm just thinking, Stephanie, if you mix, that means you're scared and afraid. I mean, scared and angry. If you're mixed, you're scared and
afraid.
You're scared and, yeah, exactly. That's crazy. Next question or comment. Yes.
Hey, Tavis, Emil Harris, Washington.
Hey, Emil, how are you, brother?
Oh, hey, Emil.
Hey,
how you doing?
Good. How important was this forum tonight when you think about what the challenges you face, and then going forward, and why did you want to come out and just talk? Because sometimes people get tarred and feathered, and being convicted in the court of public opinion and never get a chance to tell to whatever it is. I mean, how important is that? Yeah. You think about
it's the problem having an open mic, which I ain't had nowhere, that a Washington Informer reporter gets up and asks a public question, which I now need to respond to, but I'm happy to respond to it, Emil. The short answer is that when PBS made its statement weeks ago, the very first comment that I made included the following commitment, that I would, at the appropriate time, make sure that I would do my small part to create a democratic space for us to have conversations about these issues. And in that regard, this is no different, as you well know, no different than what I've done in my entire career. I did the State of the Black Union for 12 years. Prior to Stephanie being on Tom Joyner, I was a regular commentator on the Tom Joyner Morning Show. My BET days, my PBS days, my whole career has been about trying to create, again, these democratic spaces where we can come together and have these sorts of dialogues. It's not so much about me leading anything. I say all the time, I am a lover of people, particularly and unapologetically black people. I'm a lover of black people, but I'm not a leader of black people. So I'm not trying to lead anything. I'm trying to convene a space where we can have these conversations. And that's why in this era of social media, having the opportunity to film this live, to tape this live and put it out for the world to digest and to talk about in the hours and days ahead from now is important to me. When you go through an experience like this and you have a personal connection to it, you end up feeling it much more acutely than you otherwise might have. That's just me being honest. And so I don't have a lot of answers about my own situation right now. I don't know anything more, frankly, today than I knew 8 weeks ago. I don't know who the accusers are. I don't know what the allegations were. I don't know much of anything. We've been talking about due process and the presumption of innocence. I don't know anything, again, today anything more than I knew eight weeks ago, Emil. What I can tell you is this: I don't have any answers, but I got a whole lot of questions. And that's why this town hall tour was so important for me, to be able to engage with experts. I don't have the answers. But if you put experts on the stage and you ask the right questions, we can all be empowered by the information. I believe that information is power. I believe that knowledge is power, and that's what I've been trying to do in Los Angeles and in New Orleans, and tonight here in the nation's capital, tomorrow night in Chicago, and Friday night in Indianapolis. But it's really just about trying to create a space where we can have these conversations and listen and learn. I know that on the other side of this experience, I'm going to be a better man. I believe that every crisis presents us an opportunity. And part of that opportunity for me personally was to do the work that I've always done, to try to create conversations that I can learn from, that I can be empowered by as well. And so this is as much for me as it is for the people in this room and the others who will watch and continue this conversation online once we wrap tonight. That answer your question, brother? Thank you very much. Next person at the microphone here.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
It's Hannibal. I'm a student here at George Washington, a senior student, and I study international development.
Almost out.
Yeah, I think that this is a great conversation, and it's really, really unfortunate that there's not like at least like, I don't know, 35 students here. Especially the GW community specifically being one of the, like, what was it, Title 11 or whatever, Title 9, Title 11, mandates about schools that are on this list, this watch list. So I just think that that is kind of like an important thing for whoever was like organizing this to be here. So my questions, so many questions, but I want to just say that I picked up a sticker 2 weekends ago at the rally headquarters at our house the night before a lot of the rallying. And I don't watch television, and I'm kind of out of tune like that because I find it to be damaging to my personal psyche. And I think that plays a lot into like how I feel about this conversation. Really, identity. Right, that was something that was mentioned, identity and recognition for who you are, and being able to see that and being able to feel respected for that. Mm-hmm. So I picked up this "Men Are Trash" sticker. It's really, really cool sticker. It's like camouflage and like purple. It's like, wow, this is like a really cool sticker, but is this the message that, I have 4 stepsisters and a biological sister and an adopted older sister. Is this the message that they see in me, right? Men are trash. No, this isn't. But that being said, they also want to feel as though their identities are recognized and that they feel that sort of recognition from their peers and from society as a whole. I know that that's something that we kind of, that's a topic that was kind of pushed, right? America. But this is like an idea. America's kind of like an idea in a sense. And like, this is an idea that works because we have the ability to speak, right? The free world idea, right? That being said, like, secular society is still like a very, very important part of like how we roll in the new world, regardless of whether we feel that church and state are separate, because the ideas that were brought here are representative of the ideas that existed prior to America. So I just want to put that out. But mainly, like I said, recognition is like something that's like really, really important to me. And youth right now specifically, if it is in America or around the world, are finding surrogate fathers and mothers on the internet. The idea that youth can actually listen or even learn, right, about the birds and the bees is almost a non-plus. It's not even like possible anymore because of how much, like I said, because of surrogate mothers on the internet, surrogate fathers on the internet, people who are twitching all day on the internet, telling youth how to live their lives, or making an example of how youth can live the lives that they want to live.
Give me a point you want us to wrestle with, and we'll do that.
Yeah. So my point specifically is about practice and action.
Right.
So we're here on a GW campus where, one of my peers, whose father is one of the lawyers on the academy, spoke up during the awards a few years ago and said, this is a big deal, right? And here we are on GW's campus, and we're missing students. Practice and action. What advice, if it's something that we're learning all together, which I think we are, or if there are things that we should be learning from specific people, specifically the women in our lives, what are some things that we should be practicing?
You're asking advice for men specifically?
Yeah. Yes.
Got it. Okay, let's take it. I got a question. Thank you.
And action.
Got it. Okay. Dr. Matt, Julia, you first. Advice for everyone, right quick. Advice for men. We all need this. Go, Julia.
Okay. So thank you for and if you want to get this out to more students, like share this tonight on Facebook, because we know social media is probably one of the fastest ways to get things shared. In terms of some advice for men, and I have 3 brothers, and I look up to all 3 of them. I've had the most spectacular male bosses that were only appropriate with me. And my father, who escaped to America in 1956 as a Holocaust survivor and a Hungarian refugee, he's been one of my heroes. And a lot of this led to me doing the work I'm doing today. Just 8 quick thoughts. Number 1.
Give them to me fast, Julie. I'm watching my time.
Real fast. Okay.
Yeah, I got 2
Number
more people
1,
in line here.
If you feel that there are boundary issues, be in public. Like if you feel there are boundary issues, especially around mentoring and stuff, don't mentor. If HR is watching you and there's been problems, I don't recommend it. Meet in public, just between men and women on the workplace. I totally disagree with you can't stay in the same hotel. Like, are we going back to 1920, whatever? That's disgusting.
Yes, we are.
Meet in public places. All right, meet in public places. Don't go to someone's hotel room, no matter what your sex. You know, and I think for a lot of men, they're asking me like, well, is it okay if I tell her she looks pretty? And, you know, to say you have a nice outfit on, or I like your outfit, but you don't say, you know, can you twirl around for me? She might not like that. And really, I think this is a great opportunity for women to mentor men. Ask them if you're unsure. Go to your sisters, go to your stepsisters, go to your aunts, your mothers. If you're in the workplace, talk about your family. Like, talk about your family. Let her also talk. If she's happily married and stuff, just line up those boundaries on the onset. The focus of these relationships is on each other's professional growth. So I think keeping the focus on, you know, not what she did last Friday night, but really keeping the focus on how can we help each other professionally in the workplace? How can we help each other grow?
Give me one more, Julie.
Okay, the last one I'll go with, well, 2 more real quickly.
Yes.
After 8 is too late. Alcohol and mentoring and don't mix well. And then remember that this woman that is at your workplace is somebody's, it could be my daughter. It could be my little sister. It could be your aunt, your mother, that this is someone's family. And if you and that each person, you're right, wants to be respected for who they are and their individuality and what they bring. And we want to respect each other as so. We're not just sex objects, okay? We are professionals and want to be respected as so. So those are a couple suggested healthy boundaries for men and women.
I got 10.
My advice would be real quickly, how would you feel if someone did it to your sister?
Yeah.
Just plain and simple. How would you feel if someone said that to your sister or to your mother or to your cousin? I mean, guys have taken over the years, obviously, a lot of liberties, and a lot of women have allowed it. I mean, the one thing we haven't talked about here, which we could talk about, is the extent to which there was some women's complicity in some of this. You know, we won't go there. We'll just leave it there. But in terms of behavior and interacting, how would you feel if someone rolled up on your sister like that? You'd be pretty annoyed, so don't do it.
And that she had to quit her job because she had to quit her job because it was too uncomfortable, and now she's out of money and can't buy groceries and pay the mortgage.
It's going to go move into your house with you.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. Stephanie, advice for men.
I'm going to cede to the people who are standing in line.
Okay. I've got 3 people. I want to get through this. I got 3 people and I got 10 minutes. Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Dashan Farad. I'm a reporter for YourBlackWorld.com, headed by Dr. Boyce Watkins. I recently interviewed Dr. Cleo Manago and Dr. Jawanza Kanjufu concerning the images of black men. What I would like to know from either of you, particularly Dr. Malveaux, although these allegations of sexual harassment have gone across the board, we hear black men being accused and white men being accused. Some of these allegations have been proven, some of them have not. Despite that, why are black men still, by and large, demonized in the society?
Can I say something about that before you give the
Sure.
real answer to all of that? It's interesting that you said this, because one of the things that I know that I've talked about the media and the role that I think that they can't play with respect to organizing nuanced conversations and dialogues like this. But I do think that they can play a very important role, and that is what they do well, is figure out how to have and show black people generally, black men, black women, and relationships between men and women generally in a positive light. That's what they do. Entertainment knows how to take information and they know how to tell a story. And that's one that I think that that the entertainment community should embrace. They should also do what they've done before around ad council campaigns.
Yes.
And what we've done, we saw Just Say No. We all know that. Even if you weren't around when Nancy Reagan was around, you understand that. The media is very good at being able to take stats and facts and be able to put them out in a way that people can hear it, people can remember it, and people can receive it. So I would just say, from not going into the history of what we do or don't do as Black men and how we should be able to do more, but those are two real things that the media are equipped to do, that stay in their lane, and they should work at doing those two things. And the only other thing I want to add, because it's interesting you said this, because I didn't know if I was going to bring it up, but do a Google search on any of these people that we've named and sexual assault. You do one on Weinstein, Wynn, Lauer, you get sexual assault stuff that comes up. You do one on Tavis, Smiley, predator comes up.
That's my point.
And I think that
Is that true?
that is very true.
Very true.
I didn't know that.
And I think that is part of what I talk about when I say, and what Dr. Melville has been saying, that racism is alive and well, and that we can talk about all of these things, that we have the accusers, that we have the allegations, that we have the facts, that we have the facts, that we have some of these people who have been admitted to all of this stuff, and that we have a Black man who has not even been able to see who has accused him or done anything, but yet instead, just like when we saw the Central Park, we have predator when we see his name. Well, that to me is extraordinarily problematic.
The demonization of Black men, and that's what it is. The demonization of Black men is part and parcel of living in a racist, capitalist, predatory society. You have to reduce Black people's humanity in order to have white superiority. Mm-hmm. And so what you will find, I mean, you've had cases of a 17-year-old guy and a 16-year-old girl. They're both seniors. And the brother is, because you often a young black man, jailed for 5 years for basically having sex with his girlfriend. You've had cases where young ladies have lied. What we have historically, often in interracial relationships, if you go back, Ida B. Wells talked about it, but when white women were having consensual sex with black men, but they got busted by their white friends, rape, and of course these brothers were lynched or worse. But you cannot have white superiority unless woven into that is the ability to make others inferior. Black women, we had no virtue that could be violated. You couldn't rape us. Very few people were tried for raping black women. And black men were supposed to be so bestial that they just were running around raping anybody they could get their hands on. Go back to Birth of a Nation.
Birth of a Nation.
Now, we've come a long way, baby. And we had a black president or a biracial president or whatever you want to call it. But even then, that president was demonized. The monkey comments that were made about those lovely little girls. The member of Congress who talked about Michelle's booty. Now, you would not have had a member of Congress talking about Laura Bush's booty. Well, she didn't have one, but that's another story. But in any case, you have to make us less than in order for them to be more than.
Let me get these last, I got 5 minutes. Let me get these last two quick questions or comments in, and then we'll get a final thought. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Amanda Mays, and I'm a resident advisor and student here at GW. And part of my resident advisor training was an extensive amount of sexual assault training. And one of the things that we learned a lot was that oftentimes sexual assault is a traumatic experience, and it evokes a very biological response in which a woman physically shuts down, and there's no capability to respond to what's happening. And in regards to the Aziz Ansari case that you mentioned before, I was just kind of wondering your thoughts. It seemed to feel like you felt that there was a sense of responsibility for a woman to speak up when she felt uncomfortable during a sexual assault encounter, but in light of that very real traumatic and biological response, I was just kind of wondering your thoughts on a woman's responsibility to still speak up.
Don't hold up with this. Thank you. Get this last comment in, and then we'll respond to both of them in kind at the same time. Yes, last comment.
Good evening. My name is Casey Kelly McIntyre, and actually I met my husband in the workplace. So I expected this conversation to go much different than it did tonight. We were both working at a location where we were discouraged from fraternization because the company had a lawsuit with "you were my lover, you were not, do you love me, did you fire me for that, blah, blah, blah." Okay, so I ended up marrying a coworker, which put us in a very interesting situation because we knew we wanted to do a relationship, but we're walking in this very odd place. Now with this Me Too movement and all of these kind of issues coming up, Dr. Malvo mentioned something about complicity at some point. Now, I do not feel like my now husband sexually harassed me, but have we now gone into the space where there can be no relationship of some type of romance in a professional space?
Got it.
What me and my husband did is we just dated outside of the job, and he found me another job so that we could actually date. Okay.
I'm just curious. How many years you been married now? I'm just curious.
October 14th.
How many years now?
This past October 14th. It hasn't been a year yet.
Oh, you just got married. Oh, congratulations. I was just asking how long. All right, thank you. So there are two questions. There are two comments here.
I want to,
Yes.
Amanda, the young lady what's your name, Amanda? Yeah. Yep. Okay,
Yes.
the young lady who's the RA. I agree with you that women often do shut down and often do have difficulty talking about the situation. But if they intend to bring charges, I mean, you watch Law and Order. You're not supposed to shower until people are able to get a rape kit. If you do intend to bring charges, you do need to say something to somebody. Oftentimes, you may want to wait, and that's okay. But get the rape kit. And your advice to if someone is going to bring charges, the rape kit is going to make all the difference in the world. When I say that women should step up, I do mean that. But of course, we don't want to put anybody in an uncomfortable position. And if someone can't speak up, doesn't want to, I think that's okay. But I think by and large, I mean, that's the Condi's sort of snowflake comment. Many women do speak up. And I think that they should. This stuff the movement, if you will, is really about cultural change. And cultural change is the hardest thing in the world to do. But we're trying to change women's minds and men's minds about harassment, but also about assault. And they are two very different things.
Do you see a shift happening? Or is it too soon?
Yeah,
to ask?
yes and no. It's really too soon to ask. But I think that consciousness is raised. And yeah, consciousness has been raised. I think a lot of people are paying attention to that.
Your last comment, anything you may have heard, and then we'll give Stephanie's last. Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking that I was, when I was in Seattle, I was hanging out with some friends from Microsoft, and they were, to your point about marrying your coworker, that in these tech companies, people are working, and there's a desire that they're there 12, 14, 16 hours a day. And so internal fraternization, if that's the right word,
sure.
That was encouraged that people date coworkers because working in these tech companies was like your life. I think what the issue is chain of command and having a relationship with a boss where you could be getting favoritism or fired. I think that's where, if it's a direct report relationship, is a little bit different than people who work at different departments or meet at the company party.
Right.
So I don't know how far we're going to go out with all this and rental cars and hotels. That makes me very nervous because I don't think that's where we want to go. But I just wish you congratulations on your marriage. And again, I think a lot of it's going to be companies and their laws and their bylaws. Of what companies define as okay within their systems. And then if we go work for those companies, we're going to have to be part of that.
Counselor?
So I'm just thinking again about civilization. I analogize it to what I teach democracy, and I always think about Archibald MacLeish saying democracy is something that we always are continuing to do. Baldwin said we are always sort of achieving. Civilization is the same way. And we, at bottom, as human beings, are animals. We're animals. We're animals. We are a species, and we are animals. And as civilization continues to evolve, we have to understand that there are boundaries that we have to have in place. There are standards. And one of the things that does concern me from men and women is this idea that we can do whatever we want to do, whenever we want to do it, however we want to do it. And some of that is what, I won't speak to the person who comes to mind right now of the high profile, but some of that did come out, is that people felt that there was just no home training that went on. Mm-hmm. And I do think that it is important in certain places, and the workplace is one of those places, that we have to have some standards, that we have to have some boundaries, that we have to understand that we go to certain places to do certain things. We go to work to work. And if that is the fundamental reason that we go to this place, and we are understanding that, and it's not for us to hook up, that we are going to this place to work, and that the culture is built in that place, that you understand what you're doing, right. Then you have a whole lot of other things that leadership can do as far as putting policies in place. But when I'm working, there's no reason for anybody to smack me on my butt or my hindside. There's no reason for anybody to switch over and touch my breast. There's not a reason for that to happen. And so I do think that some of it is that we have to go back and just sort of understand that it's okay to have some rules and regulations. And particularly these people who you said who said that they were angry? I forget the brother who said that about being angry.
White men are angry,
White
black
men
men are
have
scared.
to understand it's okay that you now, like the rest of us, have to think about what you are doing. It's okay that you have to realize that you can't get everything that you want when you want it. It's okay that you have to realize that your intent is important and that your actions have impact. And quite frankly, if in fact this is just slowing down some white men who have been in power for a very long time, and Matt Damon, not all white men, no. But if people have to just sometimes think before they act and before they do, and think about what their actions are going to do to someone else, that's okay by me.
I want you to thank the panel for being here. Please thank them for their insights. I want to thank you all for coming. As I said at the top, every crisis presents an opportunity, and this town hall tour has been a great joy for me to be a part of this week. We have 2 more cities to go, and I'm literally running out the back door right now.
Can we thank Tavis, please?
Oh, please.
Can we please thank Tavis for doing this?
Thank you.